At the same time, DCI detectives in Nairobi probing the death of a 19-year-old girl who allegedly died after falling from the 10th floor of an apartment in Thome estate are pursuing 3 people who were in contact with the young lady.
Welcome back, guys. I trust you've been staying safe. Now, the case of 19-year-old Joan Nzomo is one that is currently making waves in the news in Kenya, in East Africa, and also getting detectives to scratch their heads to an extent, because this is a case that has its root cause currently entrenched in the mystery of possible causes as to how come 19-year-old Joan Nzomo ended up either falling from, jumping from, or being pushed from a 10th floor of an apartment in the Thome estate Airbnb in Kenya. Now, obviously, she wouldn't survive this fall. But then, there are several angles to this and several details which are so gruesome that you begin to wonder what actually transpired on the night that this happened. But let us take this case further back to just about a week before today, where 19-year-old Joan Nzomo, being the teenager that she is reported to have spent the night out having drinks at an entertainment center with a male friend of hers. Now, this male friend of hers has been identified as a man by name Lawrence Gitonga. So, there is actually CCTV footage showing Joan and Lawrence coming back to this Thome estate Airbnb apartment around 3 a.m. And in the footage, you would see that Lawrence is holding hands with Joan. They are coming. They seemed a bit drunk. I can't confirm, but they seemed a bit drunk because you could actually tell from the analysis of the footage that Lawrence seemed to have lost his way preliminary before switching back to the direction of where the Airbnb apartment was. It is not yet clear who actually booked this Airbnb. The suspicion is that this was booked by Lawrence, but there's also the possibility that it could have been booked by Joan Nzomo. Now, looking at this couple, I see Lawrence to be a bit older than Joan, although his age is yet to be ascertained. But then, this footage turns out to be the last time that anybody saw this 19-year-old Joan Nzomo alive, because right after this footage, they entered the Thome estate Airbnb apartment, and the next thing that followed was Joan Nzomo being found having dropped from the 10th floor to the pavement and unfortunately not surviving that drop. Now the question is, was she pushed? Did she fall? Or did she jump on her own? 3 tricky questions. And obviously, the first suspect who would have to be interrogated would be the man in whose company she was prior to them entering the apartment and even after they entered the apartment, in the person of Lawrence Gitonga. So investigators decided to trace the apartment room and get to engage Lawrence Gitonga. But this is where it also gets very tricky, because when they entered this Airbnb apartment eventually, they found Lawrence Gitonga. But guess what? He was unresponsive to an extent, because it turns out that he was unconscious and had also been inflicted with wounds that seeks to suggest that he had been stabbed 8 times on his chest and on his back. And you could see the signs of the splatter on the floor of the sitting room and the bathroom walls, a clear indication that either there was a struggle between these two people, or a person was actually fighting for his or her life. Now, this is where the whole thing gets even more murkier, because there are 3 questions surrounding the demise of Joan. And now the key suspect is also in this situation. He is still fighting for his life at the hospital, but looking at the situation he's in, it then begs the question, what actually happened to him too? And why did it happen to him? And who did it? Why did the person do it? And how is it connected to what happened to Joan Nzomo? And I think that this case is going to have detectives scratching their heads. I'm no expert, but I have some theories in mind. And as usual, I would want to share them with you, because I'm suspecting that whichever conclusion detectives will draw might hinge around at least one of these theories I'm going to discuss. Now, the first theory I have in mind is this. There's a possibility that when they got into the apartment, Lawrence Gitonga tried something on Joan. Possibly, maybe he was looking at getting intimate with her, and maybe she wasn't in for that, because there is no record of they being an item or being in a relationship prior to all these things. So it's possible that it could have been a one-night stand of a thing, or maybe a fling of a sort, but maybe Joan was in for the fun, but not in to go all the way into intimacy, if you get what I mean. And if that is what possibly transpired, then it could link to the possibility that a struggle would have ensued, where under the influence possibly of the alcohol, Lawrence typically may have wanted to force to have his way with Joan, in which case she would have to fend him off through whatever means she would deem necessary at the time. But then bear in mind that she also possibly seemed to be under the influence of alcohol. So at that point, her choices might not be the best in the absence of the alcohol. Given that she seemed drunk, I don't see it as far-fetched that possibly, looking at all the ones I've cited, if that was just played out, possibly she could have resorted to trying to get a weapon to fend Lawrence off, which would then explain how come he ended up being inflicted with those knife wounds. And then, after that, maybe she was of herself now and realized the devastation that she had caused and panicked, and then she jumped. Yeah, that is one theory that seems to sit so clearly in this, looking at what has happened to Lawrence and what has happened to Joan Nzomo. That is one theory that I have in mind, not to say that is exactly what happened. Now, the second theory could be that they got to the room, something actually happened between them, and the struggle ensued, and then she inflicted the wound, but then Lawrence was able to push her over the balcony to her demise, in which case then he did something to her, in which case he is responsible for what has happened to her, because bear in mind, he is still alive. So if the detectives can prove he committed an offense, he would have to be booked and tried for it. That takes us to the third thing, where there's a possibility this could have been done by a whole set of other people. Possibly there was no conflict between these guys, and maybe it was done by somebody else. We don't see any other person in the CCTV going into that room, but that does not rule out the possibility that somebody could have already been there, or maybe found another means to get into that space. You never know. Some people can surprise you. And if that's the case, it would make sense that they would first want to overpower Lawrence, who is the man and deemed the stronger person and the possible threat, in which case they would then have done whatever they would want to do with Joan Nzomo, and possibly either gotten her off the balcony or forced her to take a dive. These three theories, I believe one of them would be a bit synonymous, if not completely, with what detectives would find after the end of their investigations. But this is very unfortunate. At 3 a.m., a 19-year-old lady is seen in this situation. And not to blame the victim or her loved ones, but my question is, what is a 19-year-old doing at that time in the company of a man at an Airbnb? I think that is a good question, and I believe that, I don't know whether she was a student on campus and so she had that freedom of movement, or she was with her parents. But either way, I think that it's important that ladies begin to understand that there is danger out there, and sometimes they can get vulnerable because physically they are not the strongest. So sometimes it's important that you also gauge certain situations and rather seek to avoid instead of get involved and think that everything will pan out. There have been recent incidents of ladies losing their lives in Airbnbs in Kenya. And it's unfortunate this has come to add to that unfortunate list. But I'm counting on detectives to close this case as fast as possible in an excellent and quality detective work and bring any culprits to book. There are rumors that 3 people have actually been arrested, but I'm yet to confirm this. As and when there are updates, I'm going to bring them to you. But this is very, very interesting because if it turns out that there was a third person here, then the question would be, what would be the motive? Could we be looking at a possible scene of a love triangle or something else? Interesting days are ahead, and I believe that this case is going to break the ground for certain things to be done with regards to the security around Airbnbs and the safety regimen that some ladies should consider adopting in the wave of the seeming rise of femicide being perpetrated against ladies. Subscribe to the channel if you are yet to do so. Let me know what you also think about this case. What other theories do you have in mind that I may not have touched on? What do you think could be the possible issue here? And what suggestions do you have as far as security for women are concerned? Because hey, we need to protect our women and keep them safe. Thank you for watching this video. Take time to watch our other videos and give us your feedback on them. Let's have a conversation around these issues because the world seems to be getting more dangerous every time. I'll catch you on the next one. Stay safe out there.